Now, remember, this was a guy who at one point was the front runner, was expected to perhaps even beat Mitt Romney. He's also announcing that he is endorsing the candidacy of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Now, Perry's announcement is being called a strategic retreat. That is how he is dubbing it. It comes 2 days before Saturday's crucial South Carolina primary, where polls show it's a close race between Newt Gingrich and former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. With more on this, we are joined now by Solon Simmons with George Mason University in Washington, D.C. So, Mr. Simmons, give me a sense, will Perry's endorsement give Newt Gingrich the boost he needs to sort of blunt Mitt Romney's momentum as he heads into South Carolina?
Well, I think it may do just that. What John Huntsman was able to do for Mitt Romney, it may be that Rick Perry can do for Newt Gingrich. Really, this has come down to a race between the establishment Republicans and the conservative alternative. What we're going to see on Saturday in South Carolina is whether this conservative alternative, this base, this old Tea Party element, can rise up and play an important role in the rest of the primary, or if they're effectively going to be marginalized and silenced. Rick Perry getting behind Newt Gingrich, I think, helps him, takes away a few percentage points away in what is going to be a very close race. It looked like Romney was far ahead. Now it's tightening, and I think that any little bit at the margins is really going to help, and that's what Perry's endorsement and just getting out of the way of Newt Gingrich is going to do for him.
What happened to Rick Perry? Because in the beginning, he had so much promise that he was pegged as many thought of him as the golden boy, that he was going to do it for the Republicans. What happened?
I think he was a little too Texas for America. I think, in a way, he just wasn't all that good. And we look back at George Bush and we think of him as the ultimate Texan. But really, he was the East Coast establishment blended with that Texas alternative, that colorful Texan that Americans like so well. I think Rick Perry just didn't do all that well, and he was too pure in it. Remember, when you come after certain programs in America like Social Security, you have to be delicate about it. Use slightly Orwellian language, things like, I want to save it by getting rid of the very basis of funding it. That's not what Rick Perry did. He called it a Ponzi scheme. Just last week, this week, he attacked Turkey as being a terrorist state. These things are too blunt. They may be how many Americans feel, but they're not the main thing that you can say, the main vector of opinion. So he's just too blunt for America, too Texas for America, I think, which is what a lot of people, even Karl Rove, said about him in the beginning.
Do you think it's fair to say that the more they saw of him, the less they liked?
Well, especially in the debates. I mean, he really flubbed the debates. I mean, in some important points, we remember that famous, I've forgotten the third department I want to shut down. And when you're shutting down departments in the domestic sense, that's a moral equivalent of war. So not even to remember who you want to mix it up with is a problem. And I think he just didn't seem to be as good a candidate as one would have imagined him to be, as such a successful governor of Texas, having been in office, having so much money behind him. He didn't have what it takes. Now, getting out now, what's good for him in this sense is that he preserves a role. He's gotten better over time. Now he can come back in 4 years or in some other opportunity and still play what would be a legitimate role in mainstream high-level politics.
And why didn't he get the Christian evangelical support?
Well, I think in part because it seemed like they said that they thought he couldn't win. It really goes back to this competence issue. And Rick Santorum could. That Rick Santorum turned out to be a pretty clean candidate down the run, and he was good. He was able to speak to those issues and do it in a way which seemed plausible. So at the very last minute in Iowa, Santorum was able to grab a lot of that energy, and so in South Carolina, we're going to see a little bit of that. Now, Santorum benefits from that directly, and yet Perry's endorsed Newt. So it's an interesting set of dynamics going through.
If you are Newt Gingrich today, is it a good day or a bad day? On the one hand, you got Rick Perry's endorsement. That's worth only a few percentage points, perhaps. But now we're hearing that this ex-wife of his second ex-wife, is given an explosive interview to the media in which, she has a lot to say about Newt Gingrich and their marriage and what happened. So, good day or bad day for Newt 2 days away from the primary?
I think it's both good and bad for Gingrich. And this is one of those he said, she said things. He seems to be playing it fairly well. My own suspicion about this is that a lot of that concern about Newt Gingrich's private life is priced into the market already. He has as much baggage as Hillary Clinton did in the last election go-round. We know Newt Gingrich. We know what we don't like about him. The question is, are his ideas those that the South Carolinians want to see moving forward? It won't help him to have his ex-wife coming forward in this way. And yet the question will be, is she a compelling figure? Does she convince in her television interview or not? Or does it come down to a sense of an unfortunate thing that people would prefer to look away from?
We've covered now Newt Gingrich. We've covered Perry. What about Santorum, Rick Santorum today? There was some big news for him. Is that going to help him give him the momentum he needs for South Carolina?
You know, Rick Santorum is an interesting character, but I really think he's a base figure, and it's going to be hard for him to expand to take over that median position or the center position. Rick Santorum will benefit certainly from having won, but I think it says more about how it hurts Mitt Romney, because Mitt Romney's story was, I'm the first person to win both Iowa and New Hampshire since 1976 when Gerald Ford did it. He no longer can tell that story, and so the South Carolina race becomes ever more important in terms of how it plays out. I think if he has a strong showing, it would be good for him. But if you take the three races so far, you've got the social conservatives in Iowa, you've got the fiscal conservatives in New Hampshire, and there's something of a bitter conservatism in South Carolina. It's a mean-spirited alternative to the mainstream America in some ways, because this is the source of rebellion in the Civil War. There's an idea in South Carolina where people are frustrated with mainstream culture, want to stand up toward it yelling stop. And so I think that Santorum doesn't really grab that voter the same way that Newt Gingrich can, and channel some of that animosity back toward Washington in the way that people want them, the nominee to do.
Real quick, is this thing over? You know, as much as we love talking about the race, we got South Carolina, we got Florida, there are more and more commentators saying that this really is a slam dunk at the end of the day for Mitt Romney.
Well, it could be, but, you know, we're going to find out Sunday morning. And not necessarily Saturday night, but when the spin starts on Sunday morning. This is how we metabolize politics in D.C. on Sunday morning. You're going to see, we'll see if it comes out and Gingrich wins. I think it's not over at all. I think, in fact, what you might see is more pressure for it to turn into a two-person race. Ron Paul is still around the edges, but really a libertarian fringe. We'll see if Santorum can be, it'll be people vying for that Santorum, Gingrich base Tea Party alternative against Mitt Romney's establishment position. I think the race is probably still on because it looks pretty good from my point of view for Newt Gingrich at this point.
All right. Solon Simmons of George Mason University in Washington with the latest on the GOP race. Very fascinating this week. Thanks very much for your time today.
All right. Thank you.